I guess I have to, I'd be remiss if I didn't pass on just like so much love and appreciation. When I told the girls in my home game that I was talking to you, they were like, I'm so jealous. I'm so excited. So
Oh,
hello, all of them. They all say hi.
oh my gosh, please tell them I say hi back. Shout out to the
I
homie at home game. Oh, that's so good.
I absolutely will. Okay. I guess there's so much I want to talk about. I was literally, I had to rewatch the finale last night. I was salivating over the entire thing. Stoat Olympics has spawned so many questions in my mind.
So
But
many.
taking it back to the very beginning, where did the initial concept of Burrow's End come from? Because you talk a lot with the cast of the Adventuring Party about this idea of fear being a central theme.
Yes.
Why was going the route of like an animal allegory and using stoats the best way for you to tell that story?
I definitely like going back to early days of thinking about it all started with kind of like a weird joke at a photo shoot about cyberpunk Watership Down. And I kind of went home and thought about it and was like, cool. Both of those things actually do center like primarily around fear. Like Watership Down is how we excuse speaking very frankly to children about what it means to be human and the ways in which like there's a lot of like brutality and like heavier themes that I think we would say were inappropriate for children if it was human beings going through it. Like xenofiction for children hides a lot of the like horror of humanity while still teaching children what it means to be people by having sort of anthropomorphized animals. Cyberpunk as a genre really came up in the 80s as a reaction to like economic and social fears of Americans very specifically. So that idea of like this core of like fear and what it means to be human and like what it means for like what humans are afraid of and what they like seek to do in the world really was the like opening heart moment. And without ever really saying that like I wanted Burrow's End to be a horror season, because I think when you tag something as like this is horror, the expectation set changes to something that's very like visceral and violent. But I think there's something around the like I want to talk about the things that we fear that sort of defies or sort of aligns and moves around the like tag of a horror season, uh that you can still really dig into, and talking about like the sort of external horrors when we look at Last Bast and walking up to a society that you know nothing about with a like governmental situation that you don't isn't clearly and obviously like evil, and you have to decide at what threshold action is required of a populace. So there's a lot of like the fear of nebulous understandings of things, and then like the very personal fear of like being within a family unit and being misunderstood by people who love and know you the best. There is like fear of motherhood built into a lot of it. Like we have multiple generations of mothers at different points in the cycle of motherhood within the family, which meant that like the bear map gets a little more juice when you think of like the infestation of the chipmunks as a like allegory for some of the fears of pregnancy and like parasitism. I have a couple cousins who were like, I really didn't enjoy being pregnant. It felt like there was something inside me that like I had to make all of my decisions to like help and bolster and support while this thing was actively like, yeah, I just had, they had sort of unkind, unpleasant pregnancies. And they're like, it felt like all I was getting back from this was like pain and like discomfort, while all of the choices I was making was like for the greater good of this thing that like I was not connected to in that way yet. So there's a lot of that built into it too. I hope I answered your question. I just
No,
talked for so
absolutely.
long.
There, there's so much I want to touch on in what you just said. But I guess one thing initially was we have obviously all the animal allegory components, but then as you say, even if it's not billed as a horror season, I remember when Never After was coming out, it was like, oh, this is the scary, this is the spooky, this is the horror. But for me, when I saw that bear open up, absolutely my favorite map that's ever been on Dimension 20. I just like the
Yes.
gore of it all was so nasty. And especially like thinking about Meat Wolf in the back half of the season, the vertebrae tail felt like such a deliberate, it felt like John Carpenter, the thing sort of 1980s sci-fi
Yes.
horror. I was wondering what your process is for visualizing the horror elements because they're very visceral, they feel very specific.
Yeah. I very much like the body horror of it all. Like I came into this season, like my first ask when I first sat down with Carlos, and we were like, what do we want to see? And I was like, bear map. And he was like, oh, cool, they're gonna fight a big bear. I was like, mm-mm. It opens. He was like, that's give me a minute to process it. I'm like, I can draw it. And I still have like the whiteboard in my office of just me being like, what do you remember Polly Pocket? It opens up inside. It's
Inside,
worse.
all the little accessories. Look at all the organs.
Exactly. Look, and this lifts up, and then you can move the spine. And here's how the brain glows. And maybe it's squishy. And he's like, not that squishy. Like, you're disgusting. You need to stop. And I was like, okay, you stop me when you have had enough. So that idea of like being internally like the horror of the bear is realizing that the bear isn't the problem, it's what's within the bear. So then coming back and doing the Wolf of Theseus, I was like, well, what if, like, as we're kind of just talking about like what the thing you fear is, as we were getting into like, now this is the part of the season that's incredibly like lethal and violent. I wanted a monster that, like, you guys are all more powerful now. You've leveled several times going into this encounter specifically. You're also smarter about the things that you're fighting and the things that you want. So there was something built in the like, what if the enemy gets smarter along with you? And I think there's like two versions of that. There's like the sci-fi version of like someone that like knows your mind and can predict what you're going to do, so your attacks are less effective. And I was like, no, I think there's something weirder and grosser and more fun in the like, you do exactly what you set out to do. You cut off the wolf's head, and the wolf adapts now and goes, great, need a grosser head. Because we had that idea, like, and there's so many like themes of like undeath and coming back wrong and different and worse and be like a little out of control. And it was so great that we landed that like Ava as a character like died and came back right before that, and we got the reveal that Tula was also technically a revenant. So that idea that like death isn't the end, you can cut off Meat Wolf's head and will grow a newer, worser head. Meat Wolf is having struggle like in like moving around this map. She's gonna grow extra legs, and then like the side and that tail. I love that tail. I just love that tail so much. I was
So
like, I
do
just want like a scorpion.
I was literally I said this in the dropout Discord. Meat Wolf plushie with little Velcro body parts that you can stick on
I
and
want
off.
so badly. Yes.
Are you like joking? I know there's
No.
like a niche market for that, but like, come on.
Look, I think there's something so fun in making like something really gross. Like, we named him Meat Wolf, and he was just our little guy. So of course, like, yes, I've been yelling at the dropout homies to be like, can we get a plushie of Meat Wolf? And it's just a nasty, like, it's cute and squishy, but representative of this like
But
disgust.
a
Yeah,
little grody.
just a little grody, but in the same way that they have like that sweet Gleer that you're like, yeah, he's the saddest man. Of course he gets a plushie. Meat Wolf is the nastiest dog. Of course he gets a plushie. So I'm
The
yelling about
nastiest
that. Fingers
bestest
crossed.
boy. Oh my god, all of them. You talked about Ava, and something that Erika Ishii said in an interview, they were talking about how 5e as a system kind of encourages or rewards players for solving their problems with violence. And I
Yep.
think that's a really cool mirror of the story of Burrow's End. Can you talk a little bit about why 5e was the right system for this season?
100%. So I really wanted, I was like, okay, if I like, now that I'm going to, okay, we'll jump to the part where I decided I wanted to use 5e. Once you commit to like the sort of go-to system, because I love other systems so much and I do a lot of mashups, I was like, okay, if I'm going to play pure 5e, I want to say something about it. And the thing I want to say is what fifth edition does better than most other games is it's really good at its leveling mechanic. You feel that power creep, you feel that explosive growth. And one of the things that you can say about the DNA of fifth edition is that because it is the inheritor of like, it's the legacy of Western European wargaming. So it looks at everything through the lens of like extractivist exploration and like violence as a means of stability and control. So let's talk about what we can do to like push those themes. Every time I leveled the party, I leveled them by 2 levels, and that is a explosive and exponential power growth. But everything you see when you look at as you like level up are ways to be more effective at violence, and whether that's like magic spells that do more damage, or you're better at smacking things with a big hammer, or even like spells that are pretty social, like They are big compulsion spells. Charm person lets you like force your will onto someone else. Like it's all based in like being better at deceiving and controlling and monopolizing the violence of any given encounter. So having that as like the DNA of fifth edition, how often do I tell you you're better at killing things? Does it take before every problem becomes a thing you solve with violence? How quickly do you treat every problem as a nail when I keep giving you a bigger and bigger hammer and reminding you verbally in gameplay all the time, like, remember, you're a stoat. Stoats exploit. You took the warren from those rabbits. Like, you attack things that are bigger than you all the time. You have fangs. Like, you are an obligate carnivore. Don't forget that. And now here's a problem with a really nebulous like understanding of like who's right and who's wrong and what the solution pattern should be. And then just sort of watching and seeing what they do. So yeah, there was a lot of intentionality on my end coming in and going like, I want to say something about D&D and how it tells you how to solve problems. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to do it as little as like subtly as I can by saying like, here's 2 more levels and here's a newer, bigger problem. You could run away from the first dose of last past, but you're stronger than you've ever been. You could solve this problem. Well, what if I threaten Sybil? Is this still a conversation or is this a fight? And so like having all of that built in talks about not only what D&D does as a system, but like what, like, again, we're talking about like what it means to be human, what it means to see a problem and go like, if I was just in control, I would make the right choices. And you're like, well, how do you get control? It's not usually compromise in a conversation. Might makes right. And that's not
That's, oh
good,
my
but
God.
it's true.
No, absolutely. When you put it like that, it's like, yeah, when you get to level 20, it's not like, oh, suddenly I'm so great at mediating arguments. It's I can nuke you out of the sky and I don't have to blink
Exactly.
about it.
A
Oh
level
my
20 druid doesn't have like feed a nation. It's like I
God.
can turn into infinity animals with infinity hit points, which means that like this now becomes a violent slugfest of like you constantly killing my forms, and yet I won't stay down and I won't stay dead. And there is terror in that level of violence that we go like, cool, what a cool level 20 ability. And you're like, that's horrific. You're like, I will keep throwing my meat at this problem until you are exhausted, and then I will rip your throat out as an animal. It's like, if I think about that for 5 seconds, D&D is the scariest thing I've ever, like the scariest system in the entire world.
Oh my God. Okay, so I have another question for you about 5e, but something you said there had me bring me to a different question, which was one of the most interesting moments and something I really loved this season was right after they killed the first stoats, you gave them some pretty significant pushback as to like their course of thinking and their actions there in the form of Bennett.
Yeah.
When thinking about the larger ideas and themes of the season, and then what we just talked about in terms of the mechanics of 5e, why was it important for you in that moment to challenge their motivations and their actions?
Just because it's very easy to drop into like not main character as like a super pejorative, but when you are the main characters in a story, it does feel a lot like, well, what we've decided on as a group is the perspective not only feels correct for us, but tends to bleed through and feels true for the world. So like the pushback from Bennett and the like confusion and fear from Sybil were definitely just that like minor like camera move perspective shift of like, yes, from the like overhead camera that's watching these stoats make the right choices in their moment, like it feels like all of that is through the filter of heroics, but the optics of that from the outside in, when you are reminded of something that we often don't think about in D&D, which is like how much time has actually passed. Like you guys rocked up and in 2 days have like destabilized a population. And by virtue of like, these are like 2-hour episodes. Of course, you couldn't go and like poll the public on what they think and what they believe and get a fuller picture. Unfortunately, like the perfect play doesn't exist in a game where you don't get hundreds of hours to be like, well, I'm going to find out exactly what's happening in Last Fast and how everyone feels and come to like a correct understanding of this place with a consensus from the populace. Like you were never going to be able to get that, but you've got to know that like what everyone else sees when they look at you is just drastically different from what you guys see and the perspective that the audience holds that we all see through your eyes. And it was only pushback in the sense of like, just remember that like yours is not the only like set of eyes in this. And again, going back to themes of like, if our sort of us versus them was like this Stoat family specifically, and then the world gets bigger and bigger as they add new people and as they like sort of take Last Bass as a whole into account as who us is against like the incoming threat of humans coming back to the power plant. Yeah, you're never going to have a complete picture, but be aware that like this looks different based on different perspectives. You're not wrong, and I don't want you guys to feel bad or like regret and want to walk something back, but like there is something here outside of you that has an opinion and a perspective. This world continues to turn whether or not you interact with it. So that was the main hope.
It's something I love, and I got a similar vibe of it with Lovey, which is that like the world outside of the characters exists so viscerally. And again, it's like that main character syndrome of, oh, I'm the only person. When I close my laptop or when I walk away from the table, the world doesn't go on pause. That life is still happening. And it's just, I love how you invoke that so vibrantly across all your jamming. It's just something I really
Thank you.
adore. Then I guess on the other side of that dynamic, something I also really enjoy is how you reward your players for unconventionality. So I'm thinking about giving inspiration for outfit choices in Fae and Flowers, or the common fucking sense bonuses for like using your head when you need to, especially on a show like Dimension 20, where comedy is sort of baked into the format.
Yeah.
How do you as a DM navigate wanting to reward creativity while also keeping things on track for like story and tone? Like you can't have hats right off the bat.
Yes. But I mean, even with the hats, like the hats was a part of a thematic thing about like knowing that you're eventually going to meet the first Stoats, these people that are like parroting humanity in like a pretty like horrific way. That like, of course, you can't have hats now because if you would just spontaneously come up with the idea of hats and clothes and makeup, none of that makes as much sense. And also we're playing different kinds of animals. I don't want the Stoats when you first meet them to feel like the animals of Mice and Murder that are just like cute little British people in like little outfits the whole time, because that's a different kind of animal story. But I think there is something inside of comedy that like, as long as you can encourage making choices for the unexpected and know that like you're not going to like, there's something inside of D&D where you're like, I want to do the right thing that the GM wants me to do. We're like, okay, I'm gonna make the right choice so then we can all move forward with the plot. And a lot of those reward like mechanisms that I use are like, keep surprising me. There's comedy inside of like shocking and surprising me. Don't worry about the plot. I promise you, I have time and energy, and I'm a good enough DM that we can go, like, I'll figure it out. If you make something that completely changes the DNA of the world will adjust. So do what it is in your heart to do. It's why I also like playing with players at different like levels of experience, because for every Brennan and Erica who've been doing this for years and are just killers of comedy in general, the moment you throw in like an Amy Carrero who's like, I've never played D&D, I just have a weird idea and no one's told me I can't do it yet. Those are both sources of like wonderful, outrageous comedy. And it comes from both being very good at comedy, but also doing the unexpected. So like rewarding the unexpected and rewarding unconventionality. I don't think I said the word right either time I tried, but please write it in. Like I said the word the whole way.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so good.
But rewarding both of those things, I think, leans towards the comedy and incentivizes it.
And then talking about, you mentioned the idea of shaping the world around the players. Something else that really sticks out to me about your season specifically, just thinking, obviously, Fae and Flowers shares some roots with other systems, but thinking that Fae and Flowers, Burrows, and Fantasy High all use the same system, but they feel so different. How do you approach bending a system to fit the tone and the world of the story you're trying to tell?
I think very specifically, like Fae and Flowers, for all of its like D&D, like the D&D that was hacked into it was just to like have a grounding point for what I wanted was mostly Good Society, which is a like sort of GM-less system. It's It's very like improv adjacent. And you're like, cool, we need a randomizer effect. Let's get some 5e in there. It helps land that like you guys are in a Fey realm that sits next to worlds that we know in D&D. Like we literally have Binks as a warlock patron to Mika in Mika's world. So all of that's there. But I do think that there's something really fun, both in just purely bending D&D. Like the system is universalized and like in enough ways that you're like, cool, I feel like I can get 80% of the way there. And maybe I add something in or strip something out to get what I want. Now, all of that to say, there are lots of systems that are like trained to do specific stories well. And if you're sitting and going like, can I hack D&D to this, or can I just go play Scum and Villainy? Like, yeah, could just go play Scum and Villainy. But there is something really nice in knowing a system that like a lot of the audience has experience with, because there's something in like the viewing of actual play when you are watching it because it is like an RPG system and not just like a fun story, that you're like, part of this is because I can follow along. I know what that build looks like and what that character's doing. So when they do something that I didn't even consider was like possible within the build, there's that extra like layer of surprise and delight because you're kind of following along the notes of a like a system that you know. But yeah, I do. Sorry, can you say the question one more time so I promise I answer it, because I feel like I
No,
didn't.
you totally partially did, but it's just the idea of how you make the same system feel so distinct from season to season, depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, okay. I think that definitely comes from like what the theme of the story is. And then it becomes a factor of like heightening and turning up and turning down different parts of a sort of big crunchy system to make those things sing. In Fantasy High, so much of it is about the like inherent humor of like people who are moving through and becoming incredibly powerful in a world that prioritizes like adventuring, but they still have to like deal with all of the like social things that come from being a teenager in the world. So like what a beautiful way to highlight like the highs of like the mechanics that make you very good at fighting and adventuring, but also like that list of social mechanics that exist in the world that you're like, cool, none of this moves in the same way. Like as you level, your ability set does not get as immediately more powerful as it does when you gain access to more spells and upcasting and all of those things. So it feels like a fun way to highlight the difference between like social progression and like combat progression in D&D through Fantasy High. And Akafaf again playing with that like, here's that like social, like that set of social things, and like here's all of your like combat mechanics. All of you are archfey, you can beat the brakes off of each other, and that's not what's important here. It's about like your relative standing, because like yeah, you could fight, but that doesn't gain anything because everyone's incredibly powerful. So then it becomes a thing where like social graces and social pressure becomes the order of the day. And so you're going to care about the good society mechanics, because so much of the like D&D combat mechanics can't matter when everyone's very, very powerful. And in that same way, going to Burrow's End, playing with that power creep and the power leveling tells you the story about like what to fear, like how do you fear and how do you treat problems when you are afraid? Do you react with violence or compassion? And what is incentivized by the mechanics within D&D? So yeah, it's just a matter of like what you kind of spotlight and zoom in on.
I was gonna say your ability to sort of like scale and zoom in and out and like not even emphasizing the meat of like what you're trying to use in the system, but as you say, what abilities are no longer important, even if they're grandiose and epic and so powerful. It just makes a really fulfilling viewing experience. And it's
Thank
just,
you.
oh God, I love it so much.
Oh, thank you so
I
much.
swear, not all of my questions are ACOFAF related, but I also,
Okay.
something that you did in that season and also you did here was a really, really fun use of makeup and hair design. Rashawn and Siobhan both had some really fun hair stuff. And then you
Yeah.
had your anti-surveillance makeup. I wanted to ask about what the ideology behind the use of hair and makeup this season was.
Oh, for me, it was definitely the sort of like nitty gritty of it was that this was a pretty truncated shooting cycle. So there wasn't always a lot of time to do big transformative changes in looks because we just didn't have enough time. And I was like, cool, I'm going to be writing a lot in those breaks. So can't really go as big and as wide as we did for Akapath, which made sense because A Court of Fey and Flowers was all about the grandiosity and like pomp and visual like preening that comes from big social situations. For like one of my favorite things was sort of dealing with the like, okay, what are we going to do visually? Well, the moment they get to Last Bast, I need them to start to like, I need them to worry about the society immediately and wonder if, despite having all of these good interactions with people and being given like food and shelter and comfort immediately, no questions asked, I still want you to be worried about like what the nature of this place is. So it became boiler suit every day. And yeah, the big vector of like, how do you tell story with every part of yourself? This is a visual medium. Like if we're not a podcast, then all the visuals can and should matter. And that becomes part of the like DNA of like what new things we do with the dome and like figuring out how to push that even farther with our crankies and with the recordings and with like the different like projections. And I was like, well, even down to me, because as a GM, I talk more than anyone else there. So the camera will be on me. So what storytelling can we talk about? So like doing the slow creep of anti-surveillance makeup was intended to be part of the like mild distress and like distance put between Last Bast and the table of like, that makeup is strange. Like, what are you trying to hide from? And what don't you want to be seen doing? So I think it's always really fun to like sit down with Denise and the team and talk about like visually what we can do. But I was so thrilled, and it was a full surprise to me that like Rashawn came in with like big ideas for looks too. And Jasper was so excited to like iterate on his lightning bolt every time. So it was really cool that it was nice to feel like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it too. And I'm like, oh, I guess we're like doing a thing now. And then having Siobhan get into it, God, the last
Oh my
day
God, with
when
the gelled hair.
with the gelled hair, but like even in the finale when we had Izzy and Siobhan with like the caution tape bow and the caution tape headband, just so good. And a special shout out to Erica after Ava died, immediately
Oh my
running.
God.
And like we took a little break, like right there, just like a little bio break. And in that break, I went and told Erica, like, here's the game plan. I'm gonna have you come back, like, so roll initiative here, and then we'll bring you back in. And Erica's like, cool. About how much time do you think I have? And I'm like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll get you back in the dome. And that was inclusive of the break. So they decided to like go sprint off and like change their makeup to have like more blue reflected in it. And I was like, oh, we're all kind of doing this thing now. And that made me so happy. And I just love that like we're like getting into the bag on it. And like it's never an expectation. You never have to, but it does feel like a fun thing to like be cognizant of when we talk about all the ways you can tell a story with all the elements you have like sort of in front of you at the table.
No, that kicked so much ass. When they came back and sat down and had the blue, I was like,
Ah,
get out of here.
so good. So good. I was screaming.
You were talking about Rashawn and Jasper, both of whom brought so much to the table. I was really, it's so amazing to see new people get so impacted by the level of emotionality. Like Rashawn's crying, it made me want to cry. Like,
Oh
oh
my
my
God.
God.
Every time. God.
What was it about Rashawn and Jasper that made them the right fit for we're going to bring them into the table on this season specifically? Because I'm so glad that they are now in the world and the family of D20.
Yes. Oh man. So like super early on, I've played with like I've run a game. If you could say that you could run for the queen, but we did like a Santa like reindeer themed for the queen charity game for Roll20 a billion years ago together. And then I played for him the time before we started filming when he came out and was in a one shot that he ran, and he was so brilliant. And I like we had been friends for a while, and I was like, God, if I could find a project that could like get you to cross the pond for it, I'll call you in a heartbeat. And even before I knew everything Burrows was going to be, because a lot of that writing, like you can write the world and like themes and things you want to explore in advance and like get really granular about like the context, but the story doesn't really happen until you talk to the players and you figure out what their priorities are and what they want to play and what they want to do, given your sort of like elevator pitch of a theme and a world. So before I even knew as much about what the story was going to be, because I didn't have them yet, I knew I wanted Jasper, because he's so like fun and thoughtful and like can live inside of a character just immediately. And he immediately dropped into Thorn, like from the funniest pitch of like reluctant cult leader on the Zoom camera at our session 0 because he wasn't over here yet. Like he just had such a fun idea that even in it's a bit of like isolation, he's the one that's not blood related to the group. Like he has such a strong sense, like he's such a good storyteller on like any side of the table that like he can carry it and immediately like make that connection with everyone at the table and with the audience. And with Rashawn, I had just been a fan, so much of a fan of her and everything else on Dropout. Like everything else I'd seen on Dropout, I was like, she's brilliant. She's a storyteller. As we started researching, I'm like, she also is on a Monster of the Week podcast, so I know she understands RPGs. If she's never played D&D before, like that's okay if she says yes. I will sit down and like you can teach anyone the rules, but a storyteller is a storyteller, and like that's 80% of the work, and the other 20% is like here's the rules for this specific set of like scaffolding that we're going to use to tell a story. In the same way that like you teach someone how to do a herald when you do improv, like great, you can learn the form of it, but like if you're a good storyteller, you can tell a story inside of anything. So yeah, when we talk, like when you talk about like so perfect for the story, this story is so perfect for them because the story is like what they wanted it to be. So it was built around their like love and focus and their priorities. So in a very like tautological way, the story could have never not had them because the story is everything it is because they were a part of it. And I feel that way about everyone at the table, but them especially because it was their first time in the dome and it was just so special and so good. And every time Rashawn cried, I cried. So I'm with you on that.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
taking the time to talk to me.
you.
I was so excited to do this and it's been amazing, really.
Thank you. I hope I get to talk to you again soon about something else.
Oh,
You're so
absolutely. God,
wonderful.
I really hope so.